The first time I waved back, I had no idea I was greeting a man who had been buried for 3 years. If I'd ignored him that morning, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe I wouldn't wake up every sunrise with my curtains nailed shut. Maybe I wouldn't know what waits at the edge of dawn. And maybe I'd still believe that dead people stay where we put them. When I moved to Maple Ridge, I wasn't looking for a fresh start. I was looking for somewhere quiet enough to forget. 6 months earlier, my fiancée, Rachel, had ended our relationship after 10 years together. There wasn't some dramatic betrayal or explosive fight. We had simply become strangers sharing the same apartment, pretending love could survive on routine alone. She packed her things on a rainy Thursday. By Friday, I was scrolling through real estate listings at 3 in the morning. A month later, I owned a modest 2-story house at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac in a small, Pennsylvania town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. It was exactly what I thought I needed. Silence, routine, a chance to disappear. The neighborhood looked like something from an old postcard. White fences, children riding bicycles, retired couples tending flower beds, dogs barking lazily behind screened porches. Every morning at exactly 7:15, I poured myself coffee and stood on my front porch before logging in for work. And every morning, without fail, the old man across the street stepped onto his porch, smiled warmly, and waved. Not an enthusiastic wave, just a slow lift of his right hand, palm out, friendly, respectful, the kind of greeting neighbors exchanged without expecting conversation. Naturally, I waved back. That became our routine. Neither of us ever crossed the street. Neither of us ever spoke. We simply acknowledged each other every morning. It was strangely comforting. After 2 weeks, I started calling him Mr. Henderson in my head. I didn't know his real name. He just looked like a Henderson. Gray cardigan, neatly combed white hair, square glasses, always holding the same ceramic coffee mug, always smiling, always waving. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling before I even opened the front door because I knew he'd solve and already be standing there. Funny how quickly complete strangers can become part of your life. About a month after moving in, I finally met my next-door neighbor. Her name was Diane. She was in her early 60s, energetic, and seemed physically incapable of minding her own business. She introduced herself while I was struggling to unload groceries. "You must be the new guy. I guess that's still me. You work from home." "I do. You stay up late." How do you know that?" She pointed toward my upstairs office window. "Your light's on half the night." I laughed. Guilty. She helped carry a few bags inside without waiting for permission. That should have annoyed me. Instead, it reminded me of growing up in a town where neighbors actually knew each other. As she reached the front door, she glanced across the street. Her smile disappeared. "Has anyone talked to you about that house?" I followed her gaze. Mr. Henderson's curtains were closed. His porch was empty. "No, you should avoid it." I frowned. "Why?" She hesitated. "Just don't go over there." Before I could ask another question, she changed the subject so abruptly it felt rehearsed. "You'll love autumn here." That night, her warning stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because it scared me, because it made no sense. The next morning, at exactly 7:15, there he was, standing on his porch, coffee mug in one hand, the other raised in greeting, smiling exactly as always. I waved. He waved back. Nothing unusual, except his curtains behind him were still closed, completely closed, yet sunlight somehow illuminated him perfectly. I blinked. The light looked wrong, almost painted. Before I could think about it any further, my phone rang with a work call. By the time I looked back outside, the porch was empty. Later that afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I walked across the street and knocked on the front door. No answer. I knocked again. Silence. The mailbox was stuffed with advertisements. Dead leaves had piled against the steps. The brass doorknob had developed a greenish tint from years of neglect. No one had opened that door in a very long time. I stepped back. If the house was abandoned, who had I been waving to? I convinced myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe he lived with family. Maybe he only used the back entrance. Maybe I had simply imagined how neglected the place looked. Our brains love filling gaps, especially when routine is involved. That evening I mentioned it to Diane. She nearly dropped her watering can. "You went over there?" I just knocked. "You shouldn't do that. Why does everyone keep saying that?" She stared at me for several uncomfortable seconds, then quietly asked, "What did he do?" "What do you mean?" "When you saw him." He waved. Her face turned completely pale. "Exactly how?" I demonstrated the slow motion. Right hand, palm forward, small smile. She whispered something I couldn't hear. "What was that?" "I was hoping you'd say left." "What?" Instead of answering, she hurried back into her house and locked the door. Actually locked it. At 4 in the afternoon, I stood there feeling ridiculous until the following morning. At exactly 7:15, I opened my front door. He was already waiting. Same cardigan, same coffee mug, same smile. Only this time, he didn't wave. He simply stood there staring at me for almost 30 seconds, long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. Then, very slowly, he lifted his right hand, palm out, but instead of waving, he pointed behind me. I turned instinctively. No one was there. When I looked back across the street, his porch was empty. That was the first morning I felt afraid. Real fear. Not because I'd seen something impossible, because it had changed. And impossible things only change when they know you've noticed them. I skipped coffee and went straight to town hall during my lunch break. The clerk searched property records while chewing gum. "House on Willow Lane?" She clicked her mouse. "Belongs to the Henderson family." I smiled. So his name really was Henderson. The clerk stopped typing. Was. Arthur Henderson. She turned the monitor toward me. Black and white obituary photo. The same face. The same glasses. The same gentle smile. Date of death. 3 years before I bought my house. I stared at the screen. That can't be right. It is. Someone lives there. No. I see him every morning. She looked at me with the careful expression people reserve for someone they think might be having a breakdown. "The Henderson house has been empty ever since Arthur died." I laughed nervously. "You must have old records." She opened another file, then another. Death certificate, probate documents, tax records. Everything matched. Arthur Henderson had suffered a heart attack on his front porch just after sunrise. The paramedics pronounced him dead before the ambulance even left the driveway. Time of death, 7:15 a.m. The exact minute he waved at me every single morning. I drove home in complete silence. As I turned onto my street, I looked toward the old house. The porch was empty. The windows were dark. No movement. No sign anyone had lived there for years. For the first time since moving in, I decided I wouldn't step onto my porch the next morning. I closed every curtain before bed, locked every door, set 3 alarms, and promised myself that at 7:15, I wouldn't look outside. I kept that promise, at least for the first 15 seconds. Then, from somewhere beyond the curtains, came the unmistakable sound of someone gently knocking on my front door. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then an elderly man's calm voice drifted through the wood. "I believe..." Another pause. Pause. "You forgot to wave back." I didn't answer the knock. Every muscle in my body locked in place as the old man's voice lingered outside my front door. "I believe." A long pause. And "you forgot to wave back." I stared at the brass doorknob. It didn't move. No shadow slipped beneath the door. No footsteps walked away. It was as if whoever had spoken wasn't standing outside at all. Another 3 gentle knocks echoed through the hallway. Not loud. Not threatening, patient, like someone who knew they would be let in eventually. I backed away without making a sound. The knocking stopped. I waited another 5 minutes before forcing myself to peek through the peephole. The porch was empty. The street was empty. Across the road, the Henderson house looked abandoned again. Its windows were dark. Its porch sat beneath a layer of fallen leaves that hadn't been disturbed in years. Nothing was there. Yet when I unlocked the front door, something made me hesitate. There, on the welcome mat, rested a fresh white daisy. Its stem was still wet. Someone had picked it only minutes earlier. I called Diane before work. She answered on the first ring. You looked. I tried not to. You looked anyway. I heard him. Silence. Then she quietly asked, did he wave? No. Her breathing became shaky. What did he do? He knocked. The line went completely silent. Diane, you need to come over. She didn't sound frightened. She sounded defeated. Her living room smelled of old books and cinnamon candles. She closed every curtain before speaking. I was hoping he wouldn't notice you. What does that mean? She reached into an old wooden cabinet and removed a faded photo album. The first photograph showed a neighborhood barbecue sometime in the late 80s. Children played in sprinklers. Families laughed around picnic tables. Near the edge of the picture stood Arthur Henderson, exactly as I'd seen him. Gray cardigan, coffee mug, gentle smile. He looked no older than the day he'd waved at me. People loved Arthur, Diane said quietly. He remembered birthdays. He shoveled everyone's sidewalks after snowstorms. He watched our kids when emergencies came up. He never missed church. He was good. What happened? Her eyes drifted toward the window. The waving started after he died. I frowned. What do you mean? The first person who saw him was the mailman. He thought someone had moved into the house. He waved. And? He disappeared. My stomach tightened. Disappeared? They found his truck. They found his dog. They found his wallet. They never found him. I stared at her. She continued. Then it happened again. A teenager walking to school. Then a jogger. Then a woman delivering newspapers. They all waved back. They all vanished within weeks. My mouth felt dry. Why hasn't anyone told the police? She gave a tired smile. What exactly would we tell them? A dead man waves at people before they disappear? I had no answer. There were investigations, search parties. Nothing. Eventually people stopped talking about it. They just learned one rule. What rule? She looked directly into my eyes. Never acknowledge Arthur Henderson. For the rest of the day I couldn't focus on work. Around noon I searched every local newspaper archive I could find. There were reports about missing residents, strange disappearances, cold cases, but none of them mentioned Arthur. It was as if every article danced around the truth. Then I noticed something. Every missing person had vanished exactly 21 days after they were last seen alive. Exactly 21. No exceptions. I counted backward. My chest tightened. I'd been waving to Arthur for 19 mornings. That left 2 days. That evening I drove to the county library. An elderly archivist named Walter helped me search older records. When I mentioned Arthur Henderson, his expression changed instantly. You shouldn't say that name so loudly. Why? He glanced around the empty reading room before leaning closer. Have you seen him? I hesitated. Yes. Walter closed the book he was holding. Then you're already involved. He disappeared into a locked storage room and returned carrying a dusty leather journal. No one checks this out anymore. It belonged to Father Benjamin, the old pastor. Inside were handwritten entries dating back almost 40 years. Most described ordinary church matters, baptisms, funerals, community events, until one page, written in noticeably shakier handwriting. July 14th, Arthur waved at someone who wasn't there again today. When I asked who he was greeting, he said, they're early this year. Another entry. August 3rd, Arthur insists people gather outside his house every sunrise. No one else can see them. He says they wave first. Final entry. September 1st. Arthur begged me never to return his wave. He cried while saying it. He repeated, if I answer them, they'll finally know where I live. The journal ended there. I looked up. What happened after this? Walter swallowed. Arthur died the next morning. Rain began falling as I drove home. The windshield wipers struggled against the downpour. Halfway there, traffic slowed near the old cemetery. Red and blue police lights flashed ahead. A fallen tree blocked part of the road. As cars crawled forward, I glanced toward the cemetery. A funeral was taking place despite the rain. Only, everyone attending stood perfectly still. No umbrellas moved. No heads turned. No one spoke. Dozens of mourners simply faced one grave. Then, as my truck rolled past, every single person slowly turned toward me. Together, at exactly the same speed. They all raised their right hands, palm forward, waiting. I slammed the accelerator. The truck fishtailed before catching traction. I didn't stop until I reached home. That night, sleep refused to come. Around 2:30 a.m., the security light in my backyard switched on. I checked the camera feed from my phone. Nothing. Just rain. Then movement. Someone walked into view from behind the shed. Arthur. Still carrying the same coffee mug. Still smiling. Only now I could see his face clearly. His clothes were soaked. His skin looked pale enough to glow beneath the floodlight. He stopped in the center of the yard, looked directly into the camera, then looked upward, toward my bedroom window. He wasn't watching the camera. He knew exactly where I was standing. Slowly, he lifted one finger, not to wave, to beckon. "Come here." I dropped my phone. When I picked it up again, the yard was empty, but the security recording had continued. I rewound the footage. Arthur never appeared. The camera showed an empty backyard the entire time. The only proof I hadn't imagined it was the notification timestamp. Asterisk motion detected. 2:31 a.m. Asterisk motion. With nothing visible. The next morning I woke before sunrise. I told myself I wouldn't go near the windows. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, watched the clock. 7:13, 7:14. My heartbeat pounded louder than the ticking wall clock. Then, 7:15. No knock, no voice, nothing. I let out a slow breath. Maybe it was over. Maybe ignoring him had worked. Then my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. No caller ID. Length, 11 seconds. Hands trembling, I pressed play. There was no greeting, no static. Only Arthur's calm, familiar voice. Soft enough to sound almost kind. "You didn't wave today." A pause. "So, soft, we're coming to wave at you." I listened to the voicemail 5 more times, hoping I'd hear something different. A glitch. A hint that it was fake. Anything. But every playback ended the same way. "A lion, we're coming to wave at you." The message cut off with a soft click. For the first time since moving to Maple Ridge, I packed a suitcase. I didn't care about the mortgage. I didn't care about my furniture. I was leaving. I threw clothes into a duffel bag, grabbed my laptop, and ran to my truck. The engine started immediately. I backed out of the driveway so fast the tires squealed. The neighborhood disappeared behind me. 10 minutes later I reached the interstate. I finally breathed. Then my phone rang. It was Diane. "Where are you?" "I'm leaving." "No, you're not." "What?" "I can see your truck." I frowned. "That's impossible." I'm standing on my porch. My stomach dropped. I looked out the windshield. The familiar white fences. The same maple tree. The same mailbox with the number 18. I slammed on the brakes. I was back on my street. I had driven nearly 15 miles, only to arrive exactly where I had started. I tried again. Different roads. Different highways. The result never changed. Every route ended in front of my own house, as if the town itself had quietly folded around me. By noon, nearly every curtain on the street had closed. No children played outside. No dogs barked. The neighborhood had become unnaturally still. Only Diane remained on her porch. She waved me over. "I found something." She handed me a small brass key attached to a faded leather tag. "What is it?" "Arthur gave it to my husband the week before he died." "You never mentioned your husband." Her eyes filled with tears. He waved back. Silence settled between us. He disappeared 22 days later. She looked toward the Henderson house. My husband left one note. She unfolded a brittle piece of paper. It contained only one sentence. "If they start waving first, don't let Arthur answer." I read it 3 times. Then everything clicked. Arthur wasn't inviting people. He was warning them. The wave had never been a greeting. It was a shield. Every morning, he answered something no one else could see. something waiting beyond sunrise. After his death, no one remained to answer, so whatever had waited started looking for someone new. The brass key fit the front door of Arthur's abandoned house perfectly. Inside, dust covered everything. Furniture sat exactly where it had been years earlier. A half-finished crossword rested beside an empty coffee mug. The entire house felt frozen in time, as if Arthur had simply stepped outside and forgotten to come back. Then I noticed something strange. Every clock in the house had stopped. 7:15. Every single one. Upstairs I found a small study. Inside stood hundreds of journals arranged neatly across shelves. Each contained the same date, one entry every morning. For years, the final journal lay open on the desk. The last page read, Asterisk, they don't belong in our world. Asterisk, they cannot enter unless someone answers the morning wave. Asterisk, every reply makes the doorway wider. Asterisk, I've answered for 32 years. Asterisk, I'm getting tired. The final line had been written so hard the pen nearly tore through the page. Asterisk, if I die, someone must refuse to wave, no matter what I look like. My hands began shaking. Arthur had sacrificed decades of his life protecting everyone else, and I'd undone it in less than 3 weeks. A grandfather clock downstairs suddenly chimed. 1, 2, 3, 7 slow chimes. But it was only 4 in the afternoon. Then footsteps echoed above me. Not one pair. Many. The ceiling creaked under impossible weight. Someone whispered, "He knows." Another answered. Too late. The house filled with soft knocking. Bedroom doors. Closet doors. Windows. Walls. Hundreds of gentle knocks at once. Then silence. I stepped into the hallway. Every family photograph had changed. The smiling faces were gone. Each frame now showed strangers standing on front porches. Every stranger was raising one hand, waiting. I ran outside. The entire neighborhood stood in the street. Every resident, men, women, children, all perfectly still, all facing the Henderson house. Their expressions were blank, like sleepwalkers. Then together, they slowly lifted their right hands, palm forward, not waving, offering. Behind them, at the far end of the street, figures began appearing through the morning mist. At first I thought they were more neighbors. Then I realized they were all slightly wrong. Some had arms that bent one joint too many. Others smiled without blinking. Some carried coffee mugs made of black glass. All of them wore familiar faces. People I'd seen in old photographs. People who had disappeared decades ago. And among them, I saw myself. An older version. Gray hair. Tired eyes. He looked directly at me and slowly shook his head. Don't. The thing wearing my face raised its hand anyway, waiting for me to answer. Arthur appeared on his own porch. For the first time he wasn't smiling. He looked exhausted, older than death itself. He met my eyes and slowly lowered his hand. He wanted me to do the same. The figures beyond the mist became restless. Their smiles stretched impossibly wide, the air filled with hundreds of overlapping whispers. Wave. Just once. We only need one. I remembered Arthur's journal. They couldn't enter unless someone answered. I clenched both fists at my sides. No. The whispers grew louder. No. The mist surged forward. Arthur stepped off his porch for the first time. He stood between me and the approaching crowd. Then, he did something I never expected. He smiled. Not the empty smile I'd seen every morning. A real one. The smile of a man finally putting down a burden he'd carried for far too long. He raised his hand, not toward me, toward the things in the mist, and instead of waving, he slowly closed his fingers into a fist. The sound that followed didn't resemble screams. It sounded like thousands of conversations ending at once. The mist collapsed inward. Every figure dissolved into drifting gray ash. The street shook. Windows shattered. Every porch light exploded simultaneously. Then, silence. Arthur looked back at me one last time. He tipped his coffee mug in a quiet gesture of thanks and faded with the morning light. The police blamed the damage on a gas explosion. Insurance companies argued over broken windows. Life in Maple Ridge slowly returned to normal. No one remembered standing in the street that morning. No one except Diane and me. The Henderson house was demolished 6 months later. A small community garden now stands in its place. Children laugh there every afternoon. Nothing unusual has happened since. At least, not in Maple Ridge. Last fall, I moved to another state. I promised myself I would never live on a quiet suburban street again. Last week, while driving to work before sunrise, I stopped at a red light. An elderly man stood on the sidewalk across the intersection. Gray cardigan, coffee mug, gentle smile. He looked nothing like Arthur. As the light turned green, he slowly raised his right hand. Behind him, dozens of people I'd somehow failed to notice did exactly the same. I kept both hands locked around the steering wheel and drove straight through the light without looking back.